What's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, the drought is over for Ohio State. Buckeyes.
You know, man, everyone was up against those plucky little underdogs, but they did it.
You know, some said it would never happen again in the history of Ohio State football. Look, in all seriousness, 10 years is without a title when you kind of put that in perspective at a place that recruits and even wins like Ohio State is kind of a long time, if we're being totally honest. But yes, just as they did to start off the 4-team playoff era, which they ended in even longer drought, looking back on that one, the 12-team playoff era begins with Ohio State winning a national championship. We are, of course, going to break down all of that. We have my way too early top 10, which, spoiler alert, I already have some regrets about. I have way too early regrets about my way too early top 10. And then we'll have lad of the week, but a lot to get to. So no interview today. It's a recap pod through and through. Will, I'm just glad that we got an actual game. You know what? Just cheers, because if we had to watch the 31-7 version of that game play out for the full 60 minutes, I would have been bummed. It's just such a bummer of a way. And I know, Georgia fans, you guys like to watch your team eating chicken wings on the sideline in the fourth quarter as you're about to celebrate another national championship. For the rest of us, competitive football, it was fun.
You know what? That's actually such a good point, because I felt the homer in me kind of leaving my body as Notre Dame started to come back. Because you know me, bro. You know I was trying to get on here and be like, oh, wow, 31-7. Wow, he's really that much better than Brian Kelly, huh? And then the comeback starts happening. I go, I would rather just this be a better game. I would rather not go to sleep. I would rather, if I have no college football for, a long year ahead of me, I would rather just enjoy these final few precious moments. And it was a great ending, for sure.
I'll be honest. There were 2 drives in which, so the way that my house is set up.
The way my house is set up. I have the ability to do dishes while seeing the reflection of the TV from my vantage point. It's a semi-open concept home that I have, but I can see the reflection through a picture. And there were 2 drives in that third quarter wherein I said to myself, I'm going to watch through the reflection. I can still hear everything. And if something happens, then I can come back to action. But it was reaching, do dishes, do something productive type of game, eat chicken wings on the sideline type of game. And then Notre Dame made sure that it wasn't that game. And you know what? Credit the Irish for actually fighting and doing a lot of things, doing the thing that the 2012 Notre Dame team didn't do against. Oh my gosh, here Alabama.
We go.
No, here we go.
I'm just kidding. We don't need to go there. But that's just what they've been. That's just what they've been. And, after they scored that first touchdown and they convert the 2-point conversion, you saw Marcus Freeman go, that's one. Like, you still need 2 more of those against the best defense in college football, but that's one.
How about that play call, man?
Look, yeah, that play call, awesome. Unbelievable. And the fact that they had that creativity in those moments, I think threw everybody for a loop.
You know what's crazy too? Not to bring everything into this, but I just watched Todd Monken with the Ravens, right? And they're going, yeah, this team is 1 of 4 on 2-point conversions in the postseason. You're going, how? They have Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. That seems so easy. And then I thought about that because it had just happened watching the Notre Dame game. Okay, what's Notre Dame going to scheme up here? This can be an overthink it moment. And again, just a thing of beauty, similar to the A&M Auburn call that we talked about earlier in the year, where it was wow, this is exactly what a 2-pointer should look like. You got the trickeration, everything's clean, it's work, and the dude's just standing there wide open. It's poetry, bro.
Yeah, to have that trick play where you see the entire Ohio State secondary just coming up there and everybody's like, oh my God, how did we let somebody get behind us? But to have that type of creativity, credit Mike Denbrock.
Well, how about that OC? I was just about to say.
And then to settle for the field goal. Why? Why did Notre Dame settle for that field goal?
That was ball don't lie, wasn't it?
Dude,
that was ball don't lie.
To have a doink in that moment where you're kicking a field goal in a 16-point game to make it a 13-point game when there's 9 minutes left. College football gods, yes, they spoke very loudly on that one. They did not approve. They let Marcus Freeman know of that instantly. Didn't decide the game, in my opinion.
even if Notre Dame goes for it, I still don't think that is make or break in that game. In that moment, it still felt very significant after they just had all this momentum come back. But
and look, with each consecutive doink that happens in postseason football, people think less and less about the Chicago Bears. So another win for you.
Wow, we're just taking
See, how does it feel
at each other.
I opened this can of worms last time. I was like, aha.
I'm riding this unbelievable Bears high off of the Ben Johnson hire, and you got to throw that in there. No, it's fair game. It's fair game. What did decide the game? This might be a bold take. Bold take alert. Ohio State, too big, too fast, too strong, too good. Just too good. I thought Quinshon Judkins, Judkins with a D, not an N. I thought he woke up in beast mode and probably made Ole Miss fans curse NIL even more. More thoughts on that in a bit. We're going to get to that discussion later. But even after Notre Dame fought all the way back, you've got Ohio State 3rd and 11 after it looks like Chip Kelly and Ryan Day are tightening up, and Ohio State is going to give Notre Dame a chance to get the ball back with about, 2.5 minutes left to be able to potentially go down the field, score a touchdown, and then maybe attempt another one of these unbelievable 2-point conversions. Who knows what else Mike Denbrock had in the bag. But instead, Jeremiah Smith, single coverage, perfect route, perfect throw, perfect
He was
catch.
getting that Luther Burden RG3 treatment too that whole game. 0 targets. What's going? He's got 0 touches. I mean, they probably targeted him, but 0 touches. And then in the biggest moment, it's like, he still is him, huh?
He had 0 touches in the second half. He had 3 touches on the first drive and had that touchdown on the first drive. Beautiful route concept. Michael Casagrande pointed out they definitely copied that from what Alabama did to Ohio State in 2020 in that title game with Devontae Smith, with kind of like that, he fakes like he's going in the backfield, and then it's kind of a wheel route. I don't know. Coach Casey's got a better terminology for that play than I do. But yeah, to have him show up in that moment, obviously, it's just such a fitting play for Ohio State. And Notre Dame doing the one thing that it couldn't do in that moment was, gut-wrenching for that team, because you couldn't give Will Howard an automatic read in that spot. And Will Howard doesn't even have to look off the safety. It's the perfect play call. It really is. And when you're assuming that Chip Kelly and Ryan Day are about to be conservative again, they were not. And it'll go down similarly to the screen pass against Texas, of just the perfect call in that spot, in that moment, and the execution just couldn't have been better. And I think the Jeremiah Smith catch to be able to close out that game is going to go down with the Jack Sawyer scoop and score in terms of Buckeye lore. And that is ultimately all she wrote. And thankfully, we at least got a good game, and we at least had dramatic moments in the final few minutes. Given the way the national championships have gone, since 2nd and 26, not to go there, Georgia fans, that was about all we could have asked for in this one.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And maybe I'm just becoming like the anti-hater. Maybe I'm just becoming the lover now. But I do want to say,
that is the anti-hater is the lover.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sitting here and I'm looking at Ohio State and I'm going, hey, you got 2 losses. So I think you're kind of out of conversation for the greatest team of all time. I think we could put the 2019 LSU comparisons for this year to bed. But I will say, the way that they were able to out-physical Notre Dame, building this huge lead and looking at their path, right? And like you said, we'll get there, right? You had the 2 SEC teams. You had, the number 1 team in Oregon. I think that now we can kind of start to look back and tell the story of this Ohio State team, which is that, hey, maybe they had, those Rockets, Akeem Olajuwon vibes where they're a little bit sleepy throughout the regular season. But when they locked in, man, this team for a game could be one of the better ones of all time. I'm not going to say the greatest because of their resume and all that, but when you see how they locked in and how they were able to just out physical, how they had this amount of talent, how it felt like an 8-headed monster on defense, and there was just in these moments felt like they were just always going to make the play, which is so weird for a team that looked anything but that all year.
Yeah, that's probably the better way to shape this argument is the us against the aliens discussion of which football team. You could pick any team to go and beat the aliens to save the world. Which football team would you want? Any throughout the course of history? 2019 LSU, 2001 Miami. Which team do you want to be able to say that's who I'm putting all of my faith in? 60 minutes of football,
Yep. And Ohio State, when it's at its best, obviously, you saw just a team that felt unstoppable. And when they scored 31 consecutive points in that football game, felt pretty darn unstoppable after, and that's after Notre Dame comes out with just this masterful 18-play drive.
Oh my gosh, bro.
Holy cow.
And again, maybe this is the hater to be speaking, but you have the 18-play drive eats almost the whole first quarter. They have Riley Leonard on the sideline throwing up, and I immediately instinctively say to myself, I wonder how many times they could do that.
Yep. I think everybody was. Probably not the best omen that Riley Leonard, after the first drive of the national championship, looked like Mike Winchell at the end of Friday Night Lights.
I was saying, he looks like he just landed a D-Day during the course of this game, bro. It was like you could see the film rolling. Like you look at his face, he's like got blood, sweat, and mud coming down.
And we knew this was going to be an empty the tank type game.
Yeah.
And the rushing plan for Riley Leonard. I mean, look at the numbers of this one, the way that this shook out. Where you heard before the game, oh yeah, Jeremiah Love, he's back to 100%, he's feeling good and whatnot. And I at that point, I've seen enough of Jeremiah Love down the stretch in this playoff to know that he's not at 100%. And they say this before every game, and then he ends up getting single digit carries and has moments during the game in which he looks good. But you had 17 carries for Riley Leonard. I guess 2 of those being sacks, so still at 15 carries for him in this one. And then you had 3 carries to Jadarian Price, and then Jeremiah Love gets 4 carries. Love and Price combined 7 carries for 16 yards in this game, a game in which Notre Dame's rushing attack, that's their MO, and Riley Leonard has 9 rushing attempts on that first drive alone. So Riley Leonard had more rushing attempts on that first drive than those 2 running backs had for the entire game. Again, I agree. Probably not a good omen that he looks like he just went through, I don't know, 60 rounds with peak Mike Tyson at the end of the first drive, just probably was a sign that Notre Dame was going to be in a little bit of trouble over the course of 60 minutes. Amazing that they even responded the way that they did.
Yeah.
I mean, it really, really is. But the story is going to end up being Ohio State and what it did to get here. Mizzou and Tennessee, go claim your national title share. Go do it. Y'all earned it. In The Office, when Dwight wins Dunder Mifflin Salesman of the Year, and he has to deliver a speech to the shareholders in this massive conference room. Great episode. Maybe not a top 10 episode, definitely a top 20 episode. But Dwight is too nervous, and Michael goes up there to try and save the day. He bombs. He should have gotten more laughs for a couple of those remarks, but that's neither here nor there. And then Dwight goes up there and has the entire room just fired up, ready to go. And Michael goes back to the hotel bar after realizing that Dwight is crushing it, kind of tail between his legs. And Michael gives himself a pat on the back by saying, I captivated the guy who captivated 1,000 guys. That's basically Mizzou and Tennessee to Ohio State. You guys are in that. That's more or less what you did. Because I do think that there is something to be said. I know we talked with Bobby Carpenter about how my hottest take for this playoff is that Ohio State could have actually won the game against Michigan and still probably done something similar to this and won a title, because they just had talent on extra rest. And it was still a year in which you were waiting for a team like that to emerge. And ultimately that's what they did. But Mizzou beating Ohio State the way that it did in the Cotton Bowl last year, it definitely played a part in that $20 million push. They've come out and said, yes, that was significant. But you know what's crazy about that? Will, do you remember how word spread that Ohio State and all of their returnees, their high-priced portal additions, Jeremiah Smith, the number 1 recruit in the country. Do you remember how it came out that this would be a $20 million roster that Ohio State would have in 2024?
I remember we talked about it. I feel like it was almost like a release, or it was some type of like a conversation that got leaked.
It was Ross Dellinger.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a quote from Ross Bjork at Big Ten Media Days.
Yep, there we go.
Compare that to 2022 Jimbo Fisher with Bjork as his AD. And Jimbo, now I think infamously, defensive about how that recruiting class came together.
when everybody is going, buddy, we've got the NIL documents right here. There's nothing to hide from.
He printed the fake trophy though. That's the thing. Jimbo guaranteed the championship without admitting he paid for it. Ross Jokes said he paid for it without guaranteeing the championship.
No. Jimbo did not. I will defend Jimbo on this. It was not his idea to have the fake national championship trophy. He was presented the fake national championship plaque, and if I could get my hands on that, buddy, I would. I absolutely would. And I would put it very prominently in my background. Oh my gosh. But that's the irony, this is just a few short years later, and it became so known what this was and what it took to put this team together, this semblance of talent. You can look at that and go, it's boring that just the richest team won it. And I think that's how people feel when the Dodgers win a World Series, right? Of, oh yeah, congratulations. In a era in which you can spend ungodly amounts of money, you guys spent the most, and your talent looked the part in the postseason, and blah 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 blah. People don't really want to give credit to that because it's seemingly less skill. And I do think there is a certain amount of skill and a certain amount of desperation that goes into it in college football that's maybe not there in other sports. I will say it's not just that. And if you don't believe that, again, just go back to A&M with Jimbo. That still,
you got to have great coaches like Ryan Day and Chip Kelly.
Jim Knowles as well.
Oh man, you know what? And that's why I didn't add him to that joke, because Jim Knowles, I'm a Jim Knowles respecter, but all time, how do you like me now run for Ryan Day, who has gone from the butt of all these jokes, losing to Mizzou and losing to Michigan over and over. And think about this. We had a conversation where we said, hey, if they lose to Michigan, he's pretty much out of here unless they really do something special. They lost to Michigan and they lost to Oregon, and it didn't matter. That's to your point about what if this team got more rest. I think this team's story was so perfect in that Ryan Day was able to expel those demons one at a time. It wasn't that he went perfect and undefeated and that they killed everyone in order. It was that they struggled and adjusted, which was the big deal with both of these coaches that they couldn't do.
We're asking teams to do what Ohio State did now. We're not asking teams to be perfect. That's reality, and that's a tough pill to swallow. But we're asking teams to be rich. Money was at the foundation of this. Let's call it what it is.
We're asking teams to be tough and resilient, and I think money gives you more. Yeah, it gives you more ability to do that.
Exactly. You don't get Caleb Downs, Quinshon Judkins, and Will Howard. Will Howard, who could have gone to USC and decided to go to Ohio State. You don't get those guys for the simple, these guys want to win a title thing. Guys like Jack Sawyer and Cody Simon and Travion Henderson, they don't come back just for the simple, we want to win a title thing. That's all well and good. And you could say, yeah, we had unfinished business, blah, 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 blah. I get it. And maybe that's 98% of it. Okay. That's fine. This is an adapt or die world. We're an adapt or die podcast. We fully acknowledge that is the way that this sport has now been constructed. Ohio State adapted. It recognized that in a year in which it didn't have all of these obvious first-round guys, now we're going back to right around that Cotton Bowl loss to Mizzou, didn't have all these lock-it-in first-round guys outside of Maserati Marv, a nickname that should probably be on the back burner for the time being, in my unbiased opinion. But
the third best rookie receiver, though, big deal for him.
Fourth.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Brian Thomas Jr., Ladd McConkey, Malik Neighbors.
Ladd McConkey is better than him. Good take.
Yeah. But Ohio State did the smart thing of saying, look, we probably have a bunch of these day two guys. Let's get them back. Ohio State had just 4 guys drafted last year, Will. That's the fewest Ohio State had since 2013 when it was coming off of sanctions. You remember, like 2012. People don't talk about it. That Ohio State team was actually undefeated in 2012. Could have maybe played for a national championship instead of Notre Dame had they been allowed to, but they weren't. And if you look at the way that underclassmen declaring has changed with NIL, and there's now less of these underclassmen that want to go to the NFL, Ohio State is a big part of that and why those numbers aren't where they were in 2018, 2017. And so if you are sitting there with deep pockets like Ohio State and you recognize that need, yeah, why wouldn't you play that card? You'd be foolish not to. Like, that piece of this could become a common denominator with future title winners in this era. maybe not to the extent of what Ohio State will have. I don't know what the final tally is going to be of guys who held off the NFL draft for a year when they could have gone and then, ended up getting drafted, but, in 2025. I don't know what that number is going to be, but it'll be significant. It really will be. But getting those veteran NFL-ready guys who can handle a 16 or 17 game season, not necessarily be perfect, but handle that 16 or 17 game season. And Ohio State had plenty of those guys, which is why ultimately they beat 4 consecutive top 7 teams. Ryan Day called it arguably the best run in college football history. I've got some thoughts on that. And it became the first team to beat 5 AP top 5 teams in the same season. Even 2019 LSU only had 4 such victories, albeit in a different era. But don't get it twisted, okay? I refuse to do the thing where I just say, like, this Ohio State team is just as good as that LSU team, when we know in any other era of the sport, Ohio State season would have ended with the Michigan loss, okay? That's reality. Ohio State wouldn't have ended right there and then try to claim a national championship. No. Like, that would have ended. Mm-hmm. And the timing is everything in life. It really is. So miss me with the notion that this team should be remembered like that group, or even like 2018 Clemson or 2022 Georgia, which, yeah, maybe their best day wasn't quite as good as this Ohio State's team, but it's different when we're talking about the entire body of work. And if we're just talking about what they did over the course of the season to be able to get there. 2 things can be true at the same time, Will. Mm-hmm. Ohio State absolutely earned a national title by the path that it took, by the path that it was forced to take after the regular season that it had. Beat 4 top 7 teams in the postseason, all by double digits. Ohio State ended the year with 6 wins against teams in the top 7 in the AP poll at the time of the matchup. If you had combined Nebraska's 3 national title seasons, 94, 95, and 97, they also had 6 wins against teams in the top 7 of the AP poll at the time of the matchup. Again, you are not winning a title in this era of college football by being lucky. So everybody that's wanting to say, like, oh, Ohio State just got lucky, blah, 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 it's still not really a fair take to have either. And for those saying the regular season didn't matter, Ohio State losing when it did made that road tougher. Mm-hmm. It did. They could have had a bye. And still ended up looking like that team. They were asked to play another game against a Tennessee team that we said coming in, really good. Should be able to get a good 60-minute game. Really solid team. But the 4 teams that Ohio State faced in the playoff, Will, they were combined 50-5 at the time that they stepped onto the field to face Ohio State. Ohio State's road could have been easier if they had won a conference title. But besides Oregon, like, could you have pointed to any national champ and said that the regular season didn't matter? If Oregon had won it all this year, you would have said, wow, man, unbelievable run. And it would have been, because, golly, we're talking about a team that would have ended up winning 16 games, and they would have had to beat Ohio State twice. And then who knows who they're, it would have been an unbelievable road to be able to do that. But other than that, who would have satisfied that point from the purest view of this team would have been more deserving of winning a national championship? Everybody had blemishes. Everybody. So why is it such a big deal that Ohio State was the one that ultimately emerged when we know they had the most talent? But I still think that the regular season matters a ton. It's just not quite as make or break as it used to be. Do you think the regular season mattered for Miami? Think the regular season mattered for Ole Miss, Bama?
Too much, some would argue.
Yeah, way too much. Just throw it out. Just put them in the playoff. Who cares, man? If you only acknowledge national champs that are 1 loss or undefeated, I'd say that you're probably going to be disappointed a lot of the time moving forward, because that's just going to be extremely rare in a 16 or 17 game season. It's weird to me that people will say that a team that won 11 games with 2 wins against AP top 5 teams are somehow a more worthy national champ because they played at a time when the regular season was everything. That team, by the way, 1990 Colorado, who had a tie against Tennessee in the season opener and then a loss at Illinois the first 3 weeks of the season, that happened. But a tie, it's not a loss. Different era. All right, that's what we're talking about. We need to adjust. We need to all acknowledge that this is going to be more the norm moving forward, and instead of trying to poke holes into this or that. This is the world we live in, and this is kind of what the sport has become. And I think it's fair to be annoyed that the rich team with 2 losses got another shot at the title, and maybe that team will always be standing in the way of a plucky Cinderella story. And I'm not calling Cinderella Notre Dame Cinderella or anything like that. Okay, not doing that, but maybe it will in the future. I just believe talent still wins out in this era of college football. If you're mad that Ohio State got that kind of grace, I think you're an old man yelling at a cloud. I really do. The old way, even pre-playoff or pre-conference championships, had the grace of playing fewer games. There's just a different kind of grace than what we were used to. So I think that's worth remembering as we're trying to figure out what to make of this Ohio State legacy in the first year of this new system.
I think those are all really valid points. And I think, that's why I make the point about toughness, right? Because of the guys that came back. Ironically, we're talking about Ohio State guys staying and being champions, right? But I mean, this is a team that had Emeka Egbuka become their leading receiver all time, really receptions record holder in this game, right? So at the end of the day, Ohio State has been known as this flashy team that brings in the transfers, that has all the money. But I think that's underselling what this team really was, right? Because Oregon is a good example of a team that pays for everything, right? They're a good example of a team that is the new era. And, all these, broke SEC teams, how are they going to compete with Ohio State? Well, at the end of the day, these guys that bought in for Ohio State, the ones that stayed were champions. As cliche as that is, I think that is what makes this program special, or programs that we've seen like Georgia, like Alabama. That's something LSU has not historically been able to do. That's why LSU has not been able to string these 2, 3, 4 years together of 10, 12 wins, because it's been more of a focus on the individual, more focus on the NFL. And I think that, Ryan Day, like we've talked about, has been a guy who has struggled in these big moments. I don't think that this completely eases this, but I think this is such a poetic into this season. You talked about who's deserving all this stuff. I make the point early of, it's a 2-loss team, so I don't think it can ever be the greatest team of all time. But I think that in a year that was so wonky, this is the most deserving champion. I could look at Notre Dame and poke holes in, okay, well, you got to play, Georgia with a backup quarterback, and no offense to the Hoosiers, but an Indiana team that hasn't been there before, right? A Penn State team that always got the same similar tag of we couldn't win the big games. Well, Ohio State truly, they were like the kid who didn't do their homework until the week before, until the night before, or, whatever. And they made it harder on themselves. They really did. They faced one of the hardest paths, I think, that we're going to see going forward. And I think that as a person who didn't like the 12-team expansion, I said this over and over again, and these two teams were examples of why to me, right? I'm not backing off of that. As far as Notre Dame, with that hilarious loss, we would have been laughing at Brian Kelly 10 years ago. Okay, we would have been saying, how did Brian Kelly...
We laughed at Marcus Freeman, too. I mean,
right.
we laughed plenty at Marcus Freeman.
But that would have been the story of the season. That would have been the story of the season for Brian Kelly.
In that era, right. Yes, it would have been.
Exactly.
For sure.
And weirdly, like, Brian Kelly doesn't lose those games, which is so weird. Like, Brian Kelly beats the teams that you're supposed to. So the story for Marcus Freeman would have been, oh my gosh, you did all the hard work, but you lost to this team, and now your season's over, right? And so that is a little bit different to me than an Ohio State team where I feel like, okay, you took your lumps, you adjusted within the rules. There was no controversial ending here because they kind of smoked everybody. You know what I'm saying? There was no doubt. There was no controversy. Ohio State didn't get preferential treatment. They got the group of death. They had to host an SEC team that took over their stadium that I picked to beat them. They had to have a rematch with the Oregon team that had gone to Columbus and beaten them a couple of years ago. And that was kind of the coming out party for this Oregon regime. And so point being, like, I think that as much as this season has been, it's been fun. Okay, it's been fun, but there have been some disappointments, right? We were disappointed in a lot of the SEC teams. I think it's fair to say that. Ole Miss, Alabama, Georgia, LSU. I think Texas probably held up to about what we thought. But outside of that, I think that a lot of teams that were starting in the preseason top 5 or 6 really did struggle, let us down, including these two teams. And I say that to say this didn't end with a whimper. It ended with a good game. It ended with saying, hey, this is a team that could have hung with anyone, could have beaten anyone this year had they gotten matched up. They didn't avoid anyone. They didn't have some big, scary team. Like the argument in 2019, Ryan Day would tell you, well, 2019 LSU didn't have to play my team, Ohio State, right? Well, in this format, it's very hard to do that, to miss one of those top couple of teams that are truly the championship contenders. So weirdly, I think in a year that there was no clear number one, well, there was until there wasn't, right? There was no, dominant team. Till there wasn't. I think that this told the story of the year in a really effective way. It's the classic benevolent dictator thing where we wish we could have things exactly the way we want them when we want them, but you have to set policy. So this actually, retrospectively, would have been a great year to have a 12-team playoff because if we ended up with some kind of lame duck national champion, if we ended up with Oregon smoking everyone, we would have gone, well, this was pointless. Why did we do this? But going through exactly what we did, which was, all these favorites winning, proving how dominant that Ohio State was, proving that their run wasn't a fluke over and over and over again. So I'm not going to give them credit for losing to Michigan in terms of they just shouldn't have done that. But I am going to say that they were able to kind of make that back in a way. And I think that's beautiful. And I think that at the end of the day, college football is, and I'll just leave it off here. College football is a staff's ability to keep a group of 18-year-olds to 5-year-olds now locked in, right? And this Ohio State team was able to do that in spite of everything, in spite of all the big contracts, in spite of all the situations, the controversies, Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, all this different stuff. They were able to play like a Boise State or like an Iowa team that had these 5-6 year guys that were, getting Iowa tattoos like Burt and buying into the program. That's so hard to do. And that's why we see guys like Nick Saban, talking about how the sport is changing. We see guys like Dabo kind of getting left behind in a way. We see guys like,
Dabo's using the portal now. So Dabo is Mr. Modern as far as I'm concerned.
Oh yeah. He's got his single. Yeah. And he's got three of them. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So point being, he's almost got a quartet. Anyway, so point being, all the old school guys have at least given quotes talking about how the sport is changing because guys are becoming stars early on. They have agents in their ear, all this stuff. So that makes Ohio State's run all the more impressive because we hated this team. We rooted for this team to fail. But this team said they spent all this money. They put that target on their back, not just from the SEC, but from across America, to the point where most of America, I believe, was rooting for Notre Dame, And so it goes back to, again, my favorite piece of advertising. I saw it again. The Kobe Bryant, we don't hate the average ones, right? I don't hate Penn State. I don't hate Indiana. I hate the fan base that never goes away.
Thank you for calling Indiana average, by the way. That was actually pretty nice of you. I'll take that.
In football, we'll take it. And so
not warranted, but I'll take it.
So point being, I think that this team that had their backs against the wall, that bet on themselves with the flashy hires, with the transfer portal, with moving on from Kyle McCord, with all the decisions they made, if they had lost this game or last game, we could go, check up Kyle McCord.
Yeah.
All of that got silenced in one night.
I don't think there are going to be more than a handful of teams, even in this copycat world that we live in, who can look at Ohio State and what they did and replicate it, at least 90% of it. I think that's going to be extremely difficult. And that's not because revenue sharing is going to change the way that rosters are constructed. I just think it's incredibly difficult. And to your point, I think it's so difficult to replicate the sense of urgency that Ohio State had. And not just the tongue-in-cheek decade-long drought, not even just Michigan winning a national championship and the 3 consecutive losses to them, but just everything, and having all of the understanding of where you're at and what you need to be doing to make sure that you don't experience this pain again. I mean, it's a great motivator. It truly is. We talked all offseason about how much pressure that Lane was facing to be able to deliver on a team that, look, coming off of an 11-win season, I was talking about how this is the highest preseason ranking for Ole Miss since the Tricky Dick Richard Nixon administration. Mm-hmm. You have that sense of urgency in Oxford, and you're feeling like, man, we're recruiting guys left and right out of the portal. They were all in for it. But as much as the Grove Collective, I think we could look back on and think, man, they really ponied up for some big-time dudes. Like, Walter Nolan ain't going to Ole Miss unless the Grove Collective is really putting in that work. And they had their share of guys that ran it back that probably could have gone to the NFL and made some money. And they did all these things. But it wasn't writing blank checks. Because if it were that simple, Quinshon Judkins is on Ole Miss's 2024 roster, okay? Lane ultimately decides, you know what? I have had elite rushing attacks everywhere I've been. And we talked to Cole Kubelik about this as this was happening. Mm-hmm. And Lane basically goes, I'd rather allot that money elsewhere when I think we can make do with what we have.
And I'd like to tie one of my hands firmly behind my back by not playing Ulysses Bentley just to make it harder on myself.
Right? One of the more bizarre personnel decisions start to finish. That truly happened. Will was right. Then you watch Ole Miss and what it was with the ground attack without Judkins. and you see it run for 3.7 yards per carry against SEC teams, easily the worst of the Kiffin era, which proved costly in those 3 losses that kept Ole Miss out of the playoff. And then Judkins goes off and runs for 9 yards a carry in a national championship game in which he hits the century mark and scores 3 total touchdowns, and probably should have won offensive MVP if we're being totally honest, but I get it with the Will Howard thing. That is forever going to be a tough pill to swallow for Ole Miss, because think about how big of a selling point that can be if you're Ohio State, if you're one of the big boys, if you're one of the contenders. You had someone sign up for a timeshare. Quinshon Judkins could have stayed at Ole Miss and led the country in carries and probably gotten that team to the playoff. Probably could have been the difference to be able to get that team into the college football playoff. If we're just talking about one win, which is
I don't think that team was a transfer away from beating Kentucky. I don't know.
I think with Quinshon Judkins on the roster, they beat Kentucky.
I mean, they could have played Logan Diggs. That's the thing. They had the rushing talent.
Logan Diggs was hurt all year.
He was hurt all year. Yeah, I guess. I'm saying they added him for depth, though. You know what I'm saying? Like, they added all these different guys.
They added him as a roll of the dice depth guy, hoping that he'd be able to come back, thinking, all right, we're going to be able to figure it out. We add Henry Parrish in the post-spring window. And I'm not just saying this to just blast Ole Miss, but I'm trying to show the point that it is so much harder to do what Ohio State did, because very few people and very few teams in this sport feel like they can actually tell the outside world, we're going to win a national title and you're not.
Right.
Okay. What could have kept Quinshon Judkins at Ole Miss? Maybe that's loser talk. I don't know. But maybe if let's be honest, maybe if Judkins thought they had a better chance to win a title, he would have stayed. Maybe if they had been willing to match what Ohio State gave him, maybe that could have kept him there. Maybe both of those things. I don't personally know. And you would don't give me like, oh, he said this and blah, blah, blah. No. I'm talking like truth serum Quinshon Judkins. What he would actually say in his heart of hearts could have kept him in Oxford. Okay. That's a really difficult thing to process if you're on the outside looking in at this sport. And Ole Miss felt like it was there, and it was kind of a sneaky dark horse, make a run in the playoff type of team. And still, even a thing like that can come back to bite you in this era of the sport, when in theory, you've adapted. You've done everything that we've told you to do. Adapt, spend money, get talent, fix those issues that you feel like you need to fix, and do so in the portal with guys that are ready to play football now. And they did all that. And you still look up and you're like, dang, we had this weakness here. Didn't really cut the mustard. That guy left and went to a better situation. And ultimately, it's hard to knock him. And I know you could make the case, well, yeah, what's his legacy going to be? Well, he's a national champion. And
his legacy's awesome. What do you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, he's a national champion now. And maybe that's a roll of the dice that he took in the portal. But that's the tough thing, that even if you feel like you're adapting, you're doing all these things extremely well, is a tough thing to account for. And it can be your undoing, because the margin for error, it's greater than ever in some ways. It's also still slimmer than ever, in my opinion.
You know, I think that it's, Lane Kiffin and Ryan Day were two guys that I think had similar labels coming into this. I used to joke with my boy Max Toscano, like he would always say, oh, well, if this team had CJ Stroud, and I was like, this team could have prime Joe Burrow and they have Ryan Day, so it doesn't matter, right? Because they continue to struggle against these teams. And that was the story of Ryan Day for years and years and years. Like this that doesn't make everybody wrong. It means that, how do you like me now? It means that the story has changed, and that's so much more interesting and compelling to talk about than everybody was just wrong about me. No, you gave us reason to think that, as has Lane Kiffin. So I think at the end of the day, and the reason, and I should have leaned harder into the joke about Logan Diggs, but point being, it was all about, I don't think a lack of talent is why Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. I don't think a lack of talent is why Ole Miss lost to LSU, because they had enough talent to beat Georgia. You know what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, I think that just comes to coaching decisions. And for someone like Quinshon Judkins, Quinshon Judkins, I messed up a name earlier too. We're not perfect. But point being, that for someone like Quinshon Judkins, first off, I think you can get stale in a locker room, especially with a guy like Lane Kiffin. I think kind of button heads, and sometimes you just need to change the scenery. But I think now that Ohio State can be seen as a place where you win, it's different, right? That's what Michigan was able to do in the previous year, right? To say, hey, we have a program, we're going to play this way. Ohio State has felt a little bit more like that mercenary vibe, as did Ole Miss. That's why winning a championship with guys like Howard and Judkins, as well as the guys we've been talking about, matters so much, because I think that it's not a talent thing at Ole Miss. I think that Lane Kiffin could have left for Auburn. He could have left for all kinds of other jobs if Ole Miss wasn't giving him the money. I think it comes down to, his coaching style. Now we're giving Lane Kiffin strays, but I think that, that is underselling how interesting this year was in the SEC and for Ole Miss specifically, because, like I said, Bentley, Jackson Dart was a good runner. He was still throwing weird picks. So I think that goes to the culture. And weirdly, Ohio State has been kind of a culture graveyard lately. But I think that really, really wraps things up because, just to put a bow on this, everybody's different. We've talked about everybody's different. Someone's price at one school could be different at another school. Alabama built this whole dynasty about people coming to compromise and play for Nick Saban. People coming back like we hadn't seen in 10 years. People, saying, hey, I'll go to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, instead of go play for Oregon or USC or whatever. Guys from the West Coast moving to Alabama. We saw that over and over again. Bryce Young, Tua Tagovailoa, guys like that. Being able to do that at Ohio State, where you already had a national recruiting footprint, now you can go, hey, you can win here. Okay? It's not just the money, the bright lights. Columbus is a huge city. People look at an NHL team. It's not just that. It's the fact that now you start to get the discounts, which is pretty crazy.
I don't think they got discounts.
I'm saying going forward. Because now Ryan Day can say, I'm a national champion the way that Kirby Smart can, or the way that Nick Saban can, not just come here and go in the first round.
If you can raise funds like that for a $20 million roster, you don't even need to worry about whether you're getting discounts or not.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you're trying to bid on Caleb Downs, and you're trying to go and get maybe the best defensive player in all of college football, and you got everybody in the country, let's make it happen. Let's do what we got to do. We got to shore up our secondary. We got to figure out some guys that don't get a penalty every single time they're in coverage. Like, let's go out and get that guy. And you can do it. And there are few programs in the country that feel like they can go and take those big time swings when and I don't know what those conversations are like behind closed doors. I would love to be able to know what it was like for Ryan Day when he's sitting there talking to his boosters about, hey, this is what we're going to need to be able to hang on to Jeremiah Smith.
You know what the text says today? One line, group chat. How do you like me now? Question marks, all the boosters.
I bet they like him a whole lot because their money is well spent. I mean, it is. It's hard to debate that. But you're right. Having a guy that took a timeshare role who again, don't tell Kirk Herbstreit this, but he would have gotten more carries probably than anybody in college football if he had stayed at Ole Miss.
Oh, yeah.
And would have been potentially, maybe he wouldn't have been an All-American because their offensive line obviously had those issues. Would have made the difference in beating Kentucky, in my opinion. That's neither here nor there. But had a guy that signed up for that. And maybe we're going to see more of that. Maybe we won't see a lot of that. Maybe we will see guys that want to go to the place where they're going to have the most opportunity. Maybe Judkins is too unique of a situation, but
hold on. I'm glad you brought up Caleb Downs because I think they're each an example of what we're talking about, different situations. Downs feels like a Brinks truck guy. He feels like a guy that had his heart set on Georgia. Ohio State backed up the Brinks truck, said, okay, come out here. Judkins, like I said, was a guy that I think Ole Miss could have ponied up the money if they wanted to, but he wanted the situation at Ohio State. I think that Downs like the situation at Georgia, but the money at Ohio State swayed him. But that's what I'm saying. I think the situation now at Ohio State, it's not, we got Kyle McCord targeting Maserati Marv 10 times a game, and we got this weird offense, and the coaches are all fighting, and it's cool, but we're going to lose and disappoint everyone to get stuff thrown at you. No. Now it's like, hey, this could be a fun place to play. It's not just crippling expectations. That's all I'm saying is that guys are going to want to play there for beyond just the money.
Yeah. I think the question moving forward is going to be how desperate are you, and do you have the right ingredients to truly take advantage of that desperation like Ohio State did with, everything that we've talked about.
Most desperate team in the SEC.
Most desperate team in the SEC. I think the obvious answer is Bama. I don't know that Bama will act like the most desperate team. I don't know that I could say that with certainty. Because if Bama were desperate, I would think we'd be seeing Ryan Grubb getting $2.5 million a year to come be an offensive coordinator and not worry about the Nick Sheridan dynamic. And
has that not happened yet?
That hasn't happened, at least as of this recording. Goodness, I feel like I'm just Ryan Grubb not hired yet. But I don't know that anybody quite fits that description. Maybe Bama does the most, but then again, it's a little bit different when we're talking about. It's different when we're talking about what is truly desperate. Is desperate like this coach is about to get fired because Ryan Day, again, I definitely think there were a lot of scenarios in which he would have been fired. And I don't think that DeBoer will be quite as on the hot seat as many will make him out to be in year 2. But that's going to be obviously the great question for all of these teams contending is how desperate are you, and does your talent acquisition reflect that? Will, August 30th, 2025. I'm not going to wish time away. Texas at Ohio State, open the season.
Oh boy,
Arch at the Horseshoe. There's like 4 of the top 9 or 10 players in college football that'll be playing in that game. Think about the star power that's going to be on the field. Even if we'll hold off on the Arch thing, but between Caleb Downs, Jeremiah Smith, Colin Simmons in that game, and then Anthony Hill Jr. maybe going to be one of the top 10 players. I have more Texas thoughts, so we'll get to on the way too early top 10, but star power galore. Cannot wait for that one.
Yes. Hold on, really quick. Just back to the desperation thing. I think you're totally right about Alabama. I think they should be. I don't think they are. I think that Oklahoma is a good name. I think they're getting a little bit desperate.
You know what? That's a good call, Will. That's you know what? Let's. You're right. Let's put let's plant our flag to steal from Jack Sawyer. Let's plant our flag on Oklahoma as the most desperate team in the SEC, with like Bama and LSU being in that.
Yep, I think LSU is number 2. I think Georgia's number 3. I think Georgia's already got out and done what they needed to do with the branch acquisitions. Auburn, sweet Auburn. Who's to say what Auburn's doing?
Kentucky's pretty desperate right now too.
Kentucky's his basketball season, but Auburn's right there. But like Auburn, like Hugh Freeze is desperate, but I think Auburn fans are just kind of over it. I think that Oklahoma could jump up to a 9-10 win season under the same dynamic of like we got to win something anyway.
Yeah, that's a good call. That's a really good call. I like that for Oklahoma. Our bet, Will. I won our bet.
You sure did, buddy.
I won our playoff bracket bet. Thanks to Ohio State winning the national championship. I have decided, per the terms of our bet, to make you apologize to the Midwest.
Oh, I got something for this. Okay.
The region is having a moment right now, as the kids say. First real national championship game involving 2 Midwest teams in the quarter century that we've actually had a championship game to decide college football's national champion. It's a place that I think you could admit, and I'm not mad. I think you could admit you have liked it more than you probably gave it credit for after you went there. Fair enough.
Funny enough, man, we were talking about the week 1 of next year. I have specifically scheduled a concert in Soldier Field for that Sunday so that I'm not tempted to go to Clemson, South Carolina. And I'm really excited. It's going to be Avenged Sevenfold and System of a Down. Oh, I was sold on Summertime Shy this year, so I'll get to work on my apologies. But you put me on the great pizza, or the pie, I guess you guys call it. And so
pizza. It's still pizza. Yeah.
Okay, I think it's more of a New York thing. So yeah, point being, I'm becoming receptive to the Midwest as a concept.
Okay, I like it. And if you want to apologize to specific elements,
I will,
like Ohio State or a certain program that Brian Kelly left. I'll let you choose. Like, you just go whatever direction you want. Midwest living, Summertime Shy, whatever you want to throw in there. And you can even make fun of how we like to say "excuse me" or basically whenever we get within 2 feet of people. That's I do that. You should hear the amount of times I do that at the grocery store. It is unhealthy. It truly is. Very unhinged. You can take the boy out of the Midwest, but not the Midwest out of the boy. It's rough. But 1 minute apology is the homework assignment. So we'll do that for next week. We'll do that for the pod that we record next Monday. We'll get to some scheduling things when we finish up here, but that will be the plan. 1 minute apology to the Midwest, written entirely by you.
Perfect.
All right, Will, my way too early top 10. There are a few things I need to say at the top before we dig into this. One of which is that I do not give a rat's behind about scheduling. If you give me some argument about scheduling and strength of schedule for this team versus that team, and that's why this team should be ranked higher in a preseason poll, I will say you are doing something entirely different. You are, by defaulting to strength of schedule, you're trying to tell me about whether or not a team can win a certain amount of games, or you're predicting where you think they're going to finish. Those arguments are fine. They are just not for a preseason poll, and it's not worth muddying the waters. I base this on who a team was last year, What sort of personnel moves did they make? Does their coach have a reputation of finishing in the top 7 on a yearly basis? Kirby Smart. You might have heard of him.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say the numbers are never random. 7 is very distinct.
Yeah. Yes, very distinct, because maybe that's what he's finished inside of each of the last 8 seasons. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. It definitely is. But that's what we're going to base this on. I try and get into portal stuff. Recruiting obviously helps, but I would argue it's a little bit less important now with how fluid that whole process is. You don't need to hear me rant about that again. But that is mostly what preseason rankings are based on. I will not be the person, I apologize, Auburn fans, I will not be the person that is putting Auburn inside of my top 15 based on potential, because I potentially saw you have a 5-7 season, and I am not there yet. Maybe I will be at one point. Maybe I'll bang the drum for you. Preseason poll, not going to be that place. Call me crazy. I'm a little bit more wait and see, default to the previous metrics. So, 3 teams have missed the cut, 2 of which SEC. Just missed the cut. And one of these, I already regret. I regret not putting Illinois in my top 10. The team that I have at number 10, I probably shouldn't have. I'm admitting that right now. 10 or 11, I'm probably going to switch. If I did this again right now, I would just switch those 2 spots the more I thought about this, but it was already in writing. You can check out all of this on SaturdayDownSouth.com as well. This is already live. But Illinois, in case you forgot, played pretty darn well in the Citrus Bowl, won the Citrus Bowl against the South Carolina team that we were praising big time. South Carolina team that was missing 2 of its 3 best defensive players, depending on how you view Nick Eamon-Worried versus Dylan Stewart. But
they did win the Citrus Bowl.
Well, they won.
That was a very big deal, I feel, for that program.
They won. They got to 10 wins. Really good team. Return a lot of production. I love Luke Altmaier. Just missed on the top 10. The other 2 will. Probably going to catch a little bit more grief for this. Bama and Tennessee, not in my top 10. I'm going to try not to repeat myself too much with Bama, because I know that I'm already doing this, and I did this in the recap pod. So I don't want to necessarily just talk about the questions not related to Ryan Williams that I have about this team. But I do think that if you're looking for an argument for why Bama should be better, it's the year 2 improvement that you saw from Kalen DeBoer, both at Fresno State and at Washington. I would argue that this is a much different situation just in terms of talent that you're returning. What did you walk into, and what did we see from you in this year 1 that makes us think that you're trending in that direction? I still don't really know what part of this offense outside of Ryan Williams, and I like Jeremy Bernard too, that I'm truly sold on. Truly sold. And that's tough. That's a tough pill to swallow, because while I do think the defense solid, really solid, like a lot of the pieces coming back, especially if Deontay Lawson is able to make a full recovery, look like himself, don't necessarily know that that's enough to carry a preseason top 10 ranking with what they return. Just too many questions. And I think Bama's grace with preseason rankings was earned, because when you're as good as Bama was for 9 top 3 finishes in a 12-year stretch, or a 13-year stretch, I think, from 2009 to 2021.
That's ancient history, Connor. It doesn't matter anymore. Anyway, so
I mean, it's worth remembering, because if you're putting them at 4 or 5 kind of blindly, I admittedly used to at times, I think you should rethink that.
And remember, they've also proven people silly within the context of this year for the Georgia game. You know what I'm saying? Because at that moment in time, I was like, dang, is Alabama underrated?
Yeah, very, very fair to say that. And I think it's also very fair to say that Bama is a little bit more in wait-and-see mode. And I'm just not quite there with starting them off in the top 10. By the way, final AP poll was out. There were zero people that had Bama in the top 10 to close the AP poll.
Makes sense. I mean, how they closed.
Yeah. I don't think that's happened since 2007, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, 0 voters that made the case that Bama is one of the 10 best teams in college football, and only a handful that had them inside of the top 15 as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a super interesting juxtaposition. We just talked about the desperation and how it doesn't really feel like that's present with Bama. And part of that is the Alabama media trust that we've talked about, the way that DeBoer was hired and Ab Schefter tweeted about it and counted all the records. And I mean, I'm sure they would have the talking points of, year 2, Fresno State, Washington, it's all going according to plan. For me, that makes it very interesting because this truly is the rubber meets the road year for Kalen DeBoer, where, if in year 2 they do awesome, it's, this is just like Nick Saban. This is just like Kirby Smart. This is just like Fresno State and Washington. Losing to Vandy, that was all part of the plan, brother. You guys didn't use the right thing from, what is it, Christmas Story, where he has to get the drink more Ovaltine. You didn't read between the lines and figure out that I promised I was going to.
I hate that movie too. I hate that movie.
I know.
Favorite movie maybe ever.
Right. But it's you didn't catch that I said I was going to lose to Vandy in year 1. This is all going according to plan. And they can literally do that, and that would make sense. So, yeah, I'm actually really fascinated. It's hard to make heads or tails because, to your point, the talent composite for Alabama is still sickening. It's still top,
really good.
And depending on where you look with transfers, it can get kind of watered down, but we can comfortably say top 5 despite all the losses, Milroe, all that. So, yeah, that team could just show up and smoke everybody next year. I really have no idea.
Ryan Williams, Caden Proctor, your only 2 all SEC selections from this past year returning to that roster. Caden Proctor got second team love from the coaches, was looking at some of the numbers in terms of pressures allowed and whatnot. And some of the PFF stuff with him is not particularly inspiring. We'll say that. We'll just kind of leave that there, and how much of that is based on high profile. Look, some of it definitely is.
And I've been a Caden Proctor hater, but I'll say, the average Alabama pocket had to be twice as long as the average college football pocket because Milroe was just hanging out back there. So if you make a guy block for 15 seconds, he's going to look bad at about number 12,
Yeah. The last 3 games were not great. Not great. Don't know that that'll be on his future NFL draft reel, but maybe he'll get better. And, it is still difficult to be a sophomore offensive lineman in this conference. But I have Bama outside that group as well as Tennessee. A lot of questions that I have right now surrounding Nico and him as a player. That's going to be worth an entire pod to dig into. The weapons surrounding him, I think, are in a different place than they were coming into this point last year. Squirrel White leaves for Florida State. Brew McCoy finally out of eligibility. Dante Thornton out of eligibility. You're relying a lot on Chris Brazzell, who you got from Tulane. Mike Matthews, the 5-star that you're super excited about, but it's a reminder it's very hard to break through as a true freshman receiver in this league. And I think it's just fair to point out that Tennessee could have more questions in the trenches than I think it did coming into this year, where it felt like that was going to be an obvious strength. And defensively, after this unit was really much better than I thought it was going to be, I think I would feel better if Jermod McCoy didn't have a torn ACL.
Fair.
Yeah, one of the best corners in college football. If I knew he was going to be healthy throughout this offseason, and at the start of this season, he hopes to be healthy after tearing his ACL during, I think, offseason workouts back in Texas. If you knew that guy was going to be ready to roll, I think he'd feel a little bit different. But I think right now, Tennessee being on the outside looking in is perfectly fine if I'm Josh Heupel. The fact that they're even in these conversations at all is a testament to Josh Heupel. Can his quarterback take that next step? If he does, if Nico does, then they will easily be a top 10 team. And this will be a group that will be very much in the playoff mix once again, perhaps competing for an SEC championship if Nico looks like someone that is all of a sudden one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the sport.
Yeah, and we started this conversation with Auburn, right? And I feel like Tennessee, as hurtful as this could sound, is like an elevated version of Auburn post 2022, because I kept waiting for this next step in the offense, right? Not going to talk about Joe Melton again, but just specifically with Nico, from the first time we really saw him against Iowa, it was this smooth player. It was this guy that could run the offense perfectly. It was basically a player that you only needed this guy and everything else could kind of fall in line. And it feels like we're just getting a very truncated, diet caffeine-free version of Nico. So, we could talk about the pieces for sure, but I think it's all going to come down to him once again and seeing what Heupel's offense looks like when it works. Who do you feel good about on Tennessee right now?
I feel good. I liked what they did. They got the Duke running back, Star Thomas, which I liked. I think their backfield is still going to be good. I think they're still going to be able to run the football. I feel good about Tim Banks.
for all the questions we had coming in about whether or not Tennessee's going to be able to play complementary football and can they get a defensive coordinator that's going to want to sign up for that job, knowing that you're going to be on the field so much of the time, I feel like he's at least going to put guys in better spots to be able to succeed. So despite the fact that they're going to lose a lot of talent from that front seven, most notably a certain James Pierce Jr., who's going to be a first-round pick, barring some sort of setback, there's still a feeling of this guy will put you in the right spots. And after he did it on the back end with portal additions, to me, that's the sign of a guy that is elevating the floor of a specific unit. So that's kind of a broad answer, but that's honestly the thing that I would feel the most comfortable about for Tennessee.
You know what's funny? In 2022, their defense felt almost like deceptively good. Like it was a shocker to us, but it felt very top heavy. And it almost felt like, oh, this is a little bit of lightning in the bottle. And then in 23 and last year, the defense was the most consistent part of this unit. So let me ask you this question. We'll get out of here. I think I got to trust Banks' defense more than I trust Heupel's offense at this stage. You think that's
I agree.
Fair?
I think that's fair. I'm 2 seasons in a row. It's not. I don't think you could say that's just a pure coincidence, especially when it's two different starting quarterbacks.
Yep.
That were, I don't want to say holding the offense back, but didn't feel like they were necessarily carrying the weight that the defense was. I think there's plenty of room for improvement on that side of the ball. And in a post Dylan Sampson world, what is it going to look like? And are you still going to be able to bully people up front with that offensive line? That's going to be the question moving forward that Heupel needs to have answered, because Tim Banks did that on the defensive side. You have more of I guess, a defensive culture now at Tennessee than maybe an offensive one. But that's what an offensive coach wants. Yeah. If you feel like you can troubleshoot that offensive stuff, if you got that side of the ball taken care of, like what would Brent Venables do right now?
I was about to say Brent Venables is praying for this problem where he's like, well, if I could just figure out my defense. Because you can't. If you're Josh Heupel, he had bad defenses at UCF. That was a big knock on him. His defense getting better when he went to the SEC was completely unprecedented.
Yeah, so that's I think maybe the outlook for Tennessee going forward. Wait and see if they have some more post-spring receiver additions, which I think they very well could. All right, top 10. I'll just run through it, and then any takeaways you might have, feel free, fire away. And I'll definitely go into a little bit more depth about the number one team that we got here. I have Miami at 10. That's the team that I regret putting in the top 10. And it's not just the Carson Beck thing, too. I kind of liked what Mario Cristobal did with some of the secondary additions that nobody cares about that's actually listening to this. But that was the one I kind of regretted, even though I liked who Miami was for a decent portion of the season before the defense just totally let them down the stretch. I have South Carolina at 9. I have LSU, your LSU Bayou Bengals at 8. Clemson at 7. Penn State at 6. Notre Dame at 5. Georgia at 4. Oregon at 3. Ohio State at 2. In Texas at number 1. Yeah. So, first thoughts. What do you got?
I think that, hey, you could say Texas played Ohio State tougher than anybody else in the playoffs. I get that. I think that, Ohio State is losing a good amount. We talked about, the kind of mercenaries versus the guys who stuck around. Well, both of those types of players leave, after a season like this. So I get it to that extent. I think that we like PK. Again, Jim Knowles, I think, can got to go, shot for shot with him.
Hold on to that one.
Okay.
Hold on to that one. He might be, let's just say, returning to the Sooner State. Just saying.
Yeah, so interesting. So, there you go. So maybe it's just the disarray kind of that follows the championship with Ohio State, which is to be expected, right? I talked about it kind of when we did the eulogy on Texas' season. I think they have a lot to like coming up, and I think that this year a lot of their talent underwhelmed, and they were still where they were. So I think the sky's the limit. I think people are going to hate the Bama thing. They're going to hate the Miami thing. But the funny thing about Miami is people, like, if you believed in them in the preseason, you look pretty good. If you believed in them in like week 4, you look silly now. That's the funny thing about Miami is they always find a way to get you back for believing in them.
Yeah, it's true. And I wasn't one of the people that believed in them in the preseason. And then you see what they're doing in the first month of the season, how explosive Cam Ward looks. And you're thinking, all right, Carson Beck is going to go into a situation where you have offensive continuity on that side of the ball. Obviously, you don't have a go-to receiver quite like Restrepo, who's off to the NFL. But still, there's a lot of pieces there that still – make you feel like Miami should not be falling off the face of the earth in times that they have, like post 2017 where they start off 2018 against LSU, and then that team that starts off in the top 10 ends up being really disappointing. I think they're in a better place to kind of hold that, and they just have to be better defensively. They bring in the Minnesota defensive coordinator as well. So I do feel a little bit more optimistic after Minnesota had a top 10 defense. Texas at 1, people are going to think it's just Arch. It's not. And here's why. Mm-hmm. It's funny that you just brought up with Tennessee. Which group do you feel more comfortable with, the offense or the defense? Tennessee's number 1 because their defense is returning so much production.
Texas is number 1.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. Wrong UT. Tennessee fans, don't clip that. Nope. Don't clip that. Good call. Texas is number 1 because of the defense. Mm-hmm. If it was just Arch, I'd like to think you guys know me. I'd like to think that that I can look past a last name. Even though I do like Arch and think he's well on his way to being an awesome player in this sport, TBD on whether or not he's going to be as good as his uncles and as good as his grandpa. But I think with Texas, if you are discounting the potential, you are discounting what they bring back on defense, because I think they're going to have 3 preseason All-Americans on the defensive side of the ball with Colin Simmons, with Anthony Hill Jr., and Michael Taft. Getting a guy from every level to come back is so important. So important. And Colin Simmons was freshman player of the year, Sean Alexander Award winner. So coming back, I say that because obviously he's not even draft eligible. Same thing with Anthony Hill Jr. Easy thing to forget. But Taft was the one that was a huge return. Trey Moore as well, who really kind of blossomed down the stretch and did what I'd say what he was billed as coming over from UTSA. And that defense should just have a lot of continuity after it was the number 4 scoring unit in college football, a unit that did some pretty darn good things containing Jeremiah Smith and played Ohio State competitively. Mm-hmm. So I look at what Texas has returning on that side of the ball, plus the fact that on offense, even though you're going to have basically a new look offensive line, going to return looking like one starter there, plus Goosby, who's going to be back after he basically got starter reps last 4 games of the season with the right tackle, Cam Williams, banged up. But I think Texas has an unbelievably high floor because their backfield duo of Wisner and CJ Baxter, we didn't forget about CJ Baxter, should be exceptional. Jarrett Gibson, their 4th down guy, also still there. They have just dudes and dudes galore on that side of the ball. They have DeAndre Moore at receiver as well. Ryan Wingo still coming back. Like, they still have proven commodities on offense, even though they do have to replace their top 3 pass catchers. And I just look at this offense and the way that it's going to be built with Arch, and I think he can do everything on a football field, and everything is open to Sark. All the conversation about, here's what you can't do with Quinn Ewers. Here's why they're not attacking downfield. Here's why he doesn't really like throwing 20 yards downfield to his left, because maybe that's going to mess with his oblique a little bit. All that's on the table with Arch. And so I'm not saying I think Texas is winning a national championship, but I think in terms of starting number 1 in the country with what they have proven, mainly on the defensive side of the ball, is totally justified.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny too because say CJ Baxter, like that's an injury that could have derailed their season too. We barely talked about him after we hyped him up on the preseason, but he could just show up and be Diet Dylan Sampson this year and be like right there in the rushing leaders for the SEC. And they have this new dimension of their offense where they didn't have that last year, so that's worth shouting out. But yeah, I'm right there with you. It's always hard to kind of like predict, and it's kind of rough, especially for the teams that kind of get right there. Like, if you look at Notre Dame, well, they got to find a new starting quarterback too, or they got to go look around and get like our boy Greathouse played super well in the championship. I'm sure that might have changed things for him. So point being, I think that like for Texas, that resilience, and again, like it's so funny. I just want to keep shouting this out that Texas was Miami for 20 years, really. Yes. That every time you put your faith in them, they would just kind of you step on the rake and you look silly, you look like Charlie Brown. I get completely different vibes from those 2 programs, even though Miami is coming off of the best season they've had likely since about 2017, right? And so, yeah, I think that that's now the expectation for Texas. It's not the hollow messaging of like the eyes of Texas. It's like, no, Texas will be competing for a championship every year with Arch Manning, or it will be a failure. If they don't make a playoff with this roster, that's the expectation. That's the goal.
If Texas doesn't make a 3rd consecutive semifinal, significant disappointment.
Yeah.
Significant disappointment with the talent that they have on defense. whether or not they should be preseason national championship favorite. I don't think they will. I don't think when the season starts they will be the preseason national championship favorite. I think as of right now, Ohio State is leading that charge, understandably so. But it's interesting because I think Texas has way more proven commodities than Georgia. I put Georgia at 4, and I was kind of going, man, I'm still putting blind faith in Kirby Smart in a lot of this. Okay, like I still think that a team that is led by him on the defensive side of the ball, that retains Glenn Schumann, somebody that we were talking about so much as, man, probably his last season there, what's it going to look like? I still think that you have a high floor with a defense that good, despite the fact that you're losing a lot of pieces there. And on offense, what are you going to hang your hat on? Because there were the rumors, Buck Bellew had the comment, trying to stir up the Mike Bobo stuff and saying reports are that he's gone, blah, blah, blah. And do we even know who's going to be leading this Georgia offense, calling plays and what all that's going to look like? Maybe there's some post NFL season thing that's going to happen here. I don't know, man.
My bad. I have the documents right here that can lead to the arrest of Mike Bobo. You guys need to come check out my Periscope, my live stream, and I'll have it all right here.
Periscope is dead, right?
It is. That was a terrible reference by me.
Yeah, get on Vine and tell me about it. Yeah, Vine they should bring back. Definitely should bring back. But that's the thing with Georgia is I don't really feel offensively with what we've seen from them in the past year that I can truly trust that unit to take that next step. And defensively, I mean, they still have dudes that I like, and they still will be a really, really solid unit up front, despite the fact that their biggest game wrecker, Jalen Walker, is off to the NFL, and could end up being a top 3, top 5 pick when it's all said and done. But I just don't feel like I can put as much blind faith in them when we saw them lose 3 games this season and not really feel like they found their footing, their DNA on the offensive side of the ball down the stretch.
Yeah, I think that speaks to it right there, where almost everything that could have gone wrong for Georgia happened this year, right? You have your leader of a quarterback who just couldn't throw a forward pass for half the season. Then he physically can't do that because he gets hurt in the SEC championship game. You bring it back up, right? Your receivers are redefining what a drop can be. It feels like every drop is some unique piece of art that you haven't seen before. And yet still, you smoked Texas twice. I mean, maybe you didn't smoke him the second time, but you beat him with a backup quarterback, and you smoked him at home the first time. And it's you lost to Alabama. That was obviously kind of a weird one-off thing, but that's kind of what we're saying here is it's it took all of that going wrong for Georgia to still finish with a very good season. So maybe
6 in the country. Yeah.
If Carson Beck played well and then got injured, they're probably a higher seeded team. If Carson Beck played the way he did and then stayed healthy, maybe they have a better shot against Notre Dame. So it's everything kind of, lined up in one direction. So I think it does say a lot to Kirby and his adapt or die mentality. I think that, some of the Bobo stuff, we'll really see how desperate he is after the season. But the folks, in Athens, I think have a pretty long leash, pardon the pun, for him because he's done so much. And maybe this is kind of a down little period for Georgia, but I'm sure they'll figure it out.
Wait, could Georgia have been seeded higher than 2?
No, now that you say that. I mean, maybe they could have gone undefeated was my point. If it was real, if Carson Beck came out and was this Heisman quarterback and their defense didn't have to work as hard, that's what I'm saying.
I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe it's better for Georgia to be in that spot. Maybe it's better because last 2 seasons you started off as number 1. You didn't make it to the semifinal. The curse of number 1. Should we talk about that? Maybe.
Yes, do it.
Actually, you know what? South Carolina at 9. Wanted to mention that. This is going to be really difficult for me to not say positive thing after positive thing just about Lenore Sellers because I love the player that he became down the stretch. Again, if you have a game wrecker like Dylan Stewart and a quarterback that can mask mistakes like Lenore Sellers, it helps you so much. The ability to overcome your potential personnel weaknesses, which I do think South Carolina will have. But when you're building around those 2 guys, which that is what they are doing, I think it bodes well for them moving forward. And there will be other things with South Carolina that I'll get to that I think we can ask the question this offseason if South Carolina is capable of getting back to Spurrier levels of a 3-year, a 4-year peak like that, if they are ushering in an era like that. I want to dig into that more in depth, but just think that with the team that they were down the stretch, yes, including even the Illinois loss in the Citrus Bowl, people forget Illinois won that game. Then I do think that they are worthy of starting off in that top 10 when you are that good at two very, very important areas of the football field.
I mean, speaking of how strength of schedule is pointless, that South Carolina win by LSU that they got by the skin of their teeth felt like it was so lucky, and like South Carolina was not this good team, and then that aged like fine wine, obviously, and so that just goes to show. Now, I will say, if I'm going to sit here on this podcast and say I don't know if these guys could do this without Dowell Loggins, how bad the thing's gone, hiring Mike Shula might be it. So we'll see what Mike Shula is cooking up over there, but not super optimistic. But again, maybe that the Lenore Sellers experiment has already just started paying off dividends to the point where he's a guy that can make it happen himself, and that he didn't really totally know this playbook until kind of the back quarter of the season. Kind of like the A&M game was like, everything is where it should be here. Hold on.
So my hope with that is for Sellers' sake, he needed to get to a place from a developmental standpoint of how he saw the football field, what his footwork was in the pocket, how he was going to be able to take on a free rusher right through the A gap, and how he was just going to basically swallow that, spit it out, and then break off a chunk play. How he was going to figure out that very difficult aspect of the game. And I think 2 years with Dowell Loggins got him to a place where he now, as a quarterback, can see things a little bit better. And I said this before, I'll say it again. Dowell Loggins, great developer of quarterbacks, did it with Rattler, did it with Loggins, or did it with Sellers. Loggins did, and then did it in the NFL as well. But scheme-wise, I think South Carolina fans would agree that schematically speaking, they could definitely improve, and maybe that's where Mike Shula can help improve. It's not that he needs to develop Lenore Sellers; he needs to get him better throwing windows to be able to, to kind of move the chains with this offense. So that's kind of my optimistic viewpoint of this, of what this unit can be this year. All right. One last thing, the curse of number one. Last 20 years, Will, the stat that I always bring up: preseason AP number one has only won one national champ since 2005. Okay, 2017 Alabama. That's 20 years now that we have a preseason AP number one team's not getting it done. If you're preseason 2 through 5, you're sitting pretty. Preseason 2 through 5 has won 15 of the last 20 national titles. That is truly insane. If you don't have this pulled up right in front of you, I'll ask you the trivia question. How many teams that started off outside of the AP top 5 preseason poll went on to win a national championship since 2005? Name as many of those teams.
I'll try to name the teams. How about that? So outside of the top 5. Okay, Auburn, easy, comes to mind.
You got Auburn. 2010 is what you're referring to.
Yes.
That I think that's the most obvious one. That team started off number 22 in the country. That is the only team in the last 20 years that started outside of the top 11 who went on to win a national championship.
And you said outside of the top 5. I feel like actually 2019 LSU is not top 5. Am I right there?
You are correct. Very good. It started 6. Yes. That's a sneaky one. That would be the one that I was expecting you to forget.
Yes. And I would think, let's see. Yeah, it's all like Georgia. Let me go back through. There's got to be a random one, man. But it's not coming to me right now.
So the 3 that are left here are, I think.
Yep. Okay. FSU is the one I should have gotten for sure, because they kind of came out of nowhere. Florida, I could see it with Urban Meyer. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
you're good. You're good. 2006 Florida, where it's year 2 of Urban. That team started off number 7, and then 2013 FSU started off at number 11. So that's wait a minute, did I do that math right? Yeah, that's 4 teams there. 4 teams that started off.
Yeah, Florida,
the top 5.
FSU, LSU, Auburn.
Yeah, is that 4? Did I just do math wrong? Oh yeah. And then that's 16 teams total. Yeah. That's the way that works, because then there's the number 1 team. That's right. All right, so 4 teams that started off outside of that group. That is insane.
Auburn at 22. I'm sorry, that's just so funny. Cam's a goat.
Yeah, Cam. Gosh. Don't compare anybody to Cam Newton. Just don't.
Never.
It is not worth your time. All right, let's close with some lad of the week. You want me to start us off, or do you have? Can I guess yours?
Go ahead.
I mean, Ryan Day is it Ryan Day?
It's related. Go ahead and do yours.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go with Jalen Carter. I'm going to go with the guy who so many people said coming into last year's draft, 2023 draft, I should say, that it's too many character concerns. I know that this guy's just crazy talented, but you know what? You just can't take a chance on a guy like that in the top 10. And my God, Eagles do not advance to the NFC Championship without him. Convinced of that. We were watching basically like the second half of that game, had it on kind of in the background, and seeing the plays that guy made, especially that third down, the third down sack of Stafford. Was play of the game, maybe play of the Eagles season, to be able to kill their momentum in that spot, and then having the pressure on fourth down as well. He's just a man-child. He's just a different dude. He did the Jaden Daniels play again, but did it to Stafford, and then realized, oh yeah, this is the NFL, and I can't if I raise him up, another dog, I'm going to be in trouble here. But he's awesome, and I talk Eagles with one of our another site that our company owns is Crossing Broad, who covers all things Eagles, and my guy Kevin Kincaid every once in a while will converse about something. He'll ask me about a Georgia player or something like that, and they love all these, like the Nolan Smiths of the world and Jordan Davises and the Kobe Dean having the year that he's having. They love this, and they are absolutely giddy that Jalen Carter fell to them. And I'm happy for him. You know, I've said before, I live in a pop guy. I live where Jalen Carter grew up. I knew people that played AAU basketball with him, so I was like hearing stories about him even when he was a freshman at Georgia, and some of the stuff that he would do. Like he just did weightlifting in high school, because why wouldn't you? And you know, he used to throw down alley-oop dunks at 300 pounds and was just this freak athlete, was just unbelievably talented. And everybody always kind of said, like, yeah, like if that dude locks in, look out, because he will be, you know, living up to those Warren Sapp comparisons, another Apopka High School guy. And he will pretty crazy. Apopka High School, very talented. And that'll be one of those guys that you just go, man, he is special, and he is doing special things. I'm just really happy for him when you know what it kind of took out of him going through that process during the pre-draft period. And while I do think he would have been good on the Bears, I'm in a weird way glad that he ended up on the Eagles, because it was a better situation for his surroundings to get back with his former Georgia teammates and be where he thrives. So I'm not jealous at all or bitter. Like I'm really not that he's not in a Bears uniform. Bears took Darnell Wright and tackle out of Tennessee, who ended up being a really good player as well. But just happy for Jalen Carter, because that dude is just an absolute joy to watch when he is playing at the level that he's playing at right now.
Yeah, that game was a thing of beauty, wasn't it? I mean, Winter Wonderland, Snow Globe. Felt like I had a lot of players that we watched in college first was in there. One guy that's gotten completely redeemed by the NFL, Omar Spates, tearing it up for the Rams. He's vindicated for all the madhouse. I mean, every time I see Omar Spates play well in the NFL, I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy gets worse madhouse by the day. But yeah, I mean, the receivers for the Eagles, Matt Stafford, to your point, like, so it's just a beautiful, beautiful game to watch. And yeah, I mean, watching the way that went down, one of the craziest catches I've seen in a playoff game they had on the Rams there to set that up, and it felt like everything was going their way. And then Jalen Carter said, "No, sir." That was the end of that
game record. That's if you got them, count your blessings, man. They're tough to come by.
Yeah. On to mine, and you got part of it. So I'm going to give you credit because you're not wrong, but the Ohio State coaching staff, I talked about it earlier. I'm the type of guy that'll eat some crow here and there. I had this team losing to Tennessee because I thought Ryan Day didn't have that dog in him, was a little bit of a showman more than a guy that gets gritty. And I think that this was a very gritty team. I think this team was everything that Ohio State was told they couldn't be, in these Michigan games where you got all the guys, staying 5 and 6 years, punching you in the mouth, and your team looks expensive and soft. And I think that, so many coaches, so many players, like we talked about, Downs, Judkins, all these guys have hitched their wagon to Ryan Day and believed in him. And again, like Chip Kelly, there have been so many things said about Chip Kelly. Speaking of the Eagles, right? If Eagles fans are still listening here, that's the guy they hate, and I mean, kind of, he's burned bridges everywhere he's been to the point where now we're looking back. I mean, even at UCLA, now it's like this was kind of his last chance to really be relevant. And I remember that hiring started with Bill O'Brien, obviously, and then he gets the BC job, and we're going, oh man, like, so I mean, think about that. If Ryan Day had his first choice as head coach or OC against Bill O'Brien, what a different world that would have been.
That's a good point. I forgot about that.
Yeah, dude. And so it was kind of like just read it as a stepchild style thing, and be like, okay, well, Chip Kelly, nobody wants you, like da 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 da. And now he's going over to, he's going to be a national champion, and he's a guy that the Oregon run early. It's so underrated how much he did for Oregon. Like Oregon was nothing before he got there, and I always like to say that because it puts them in perspective. And now it's like Oregon has made it seem like it wasn't just Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly has gone on to kind of struggle outside of that, and in reality, he's a brilliant offensive mind. He's just not a great guy to get along with, and maybe an OC is a perfect title for him, where he doesn't have to go manage guys, biorhythms like he was doing in Philly. So yeah, I think that this was a big time, like all time, how do you like me now championship run for a lot of individuals and for Ohio State as a whole.
I don't know how they keep their assistants as long as they do, because Larry Johnson, their defensive line coach, has been there forever.
Yep.
He was there when both Boses were there. Like, if I'm not mistaken, I need to look this up, and it's going to give me the Larry Johnson who played in the NBA for a long time. Shout out you.
But keep giving the guy Boses, right? He's going to stay there for a while. That's the thing, is he bringing those 5 stars, it just adds to your resume. It's like Corey Raymond in a way. It's like, well, as long as the 5 stars keep showing up, I'm happy here. It makes me look good.
Seriously, but it's unbelievable because think about this. He's 72. He has been at Ohio State. Well, get this. He's been at Ohio State since 2014. He was Penn State's defensive line coach for 14 years. Wow. He's been a Big Ten defensive line coach for a quarter century.
This guy's lad of the week because he hates moving. That's relatable. He was at Penn State for 14 years, and he went, you know what? This thing's getting kind of south on me. So that means he would have survived the Joe Pa stuff through Penn State, and then he would have left. Yeah. Yeah, not that that's like his fault or anything. I'm just saying, like, all that went down. He's like, I just don't want to move, guys. I hate moving. Good for him.
Moving is the single worst thing that we as human beings do on a regular basis. Trademark pending. But he was at T.C. Williams too. Remember the Titans fame, of course. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Brian Hartline's another one of those guys where you just wait a minute, he's still there. How are they still finding a way to do this? Of course, I'm going to say this, and then we're going to get news that Jim Knowles is going to Oklahoma to be Brent Venables' defensive coordinator.
That's crazy. Good for them.
Yeah. If it happens, if that happens. But yeah, it is pretty crazy to think about this staff, a staff that could have very well all been axed at season's end if this didn't go right, if they didn't figure things out in the playoff. I do think, as much as this is a How Do You Like Me Now tour for them, it was still very much a pressure-packed month, and they were able to get through it. And yeah, they are champions. Nobody can take that away from them, except the NCAA, maybe in due time. $20 million roster.
Don't get any tattoos, gentlemen.
Yeah, no more tattoos. No tattoos related to NIL at all. I wonder if the first tattoo-related NIL deal in Columbus was just this murky thing of, man, you better read the fine print on this. Make sure that we're good in every possible
Tressel's got to be somewhere. That's a guy we never talk about. There should be pounded tables about this because people are getting like Bitcoin tattoos now that are sponsored in college.
Tressel also lied to the NCAA. That was his bigger thing.
Oh, we got to be honest to the NCAA folks. They got our best interest at heart. Oh.
He got caught with lying to the NCAA in a pretty obvious way, and that's what he got popped for ultimately. So I do feel a little bit of sympathy for that, but still at the same time, yeah, Ohio State, just like LSU, last 3 coaches won a national championship.
How about that? Yeah,
pretty crazy. All right, a little bit of a scheduling note. This is the last pod that we're going to record this week. I am actually I'm flying back to Chicago with Claire later this week, see some family, see some friends. I'll be a single parent traveling through the airport with a toddler, so prayers are appreciated. Everyone.
Good luck.
Speaking of grace, that's going to be needed. Your boy will be needing grace in spades. Next week, we are going to start our usual recording schedule that we have for the off season of recording Monday and Thursday. So that means episodes during the off season will drop Tuesday and Friday, unless we tell you otherwise. And maybe we'll get the people going with some way too early quarterback rankings that I've teased, I've talked about. I've already rolled those out on SDS, but would love to be able to dig into that a bit more. So maybe we'll do something like that next week, unless we get some crazy big news that'll happen, because that's just the way that these things tend to work. Football season over. Makes me sad. Even though it is over, you should still please leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Saturday Down South on YouTube, where you can watch every single episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the SDS Pod, at Sat Down South, at CJ Rivera, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.